If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel and leave a like to receive more emotional tales from the Old West. They say weak women don't survive the desert. But what if the weakest is actually the strongest? This story begins with a mother, alone, walking miles under the burning sun, carrying not just a baby on her back, but hope itself. Rejected, humiliated, cast out, and yet, still alive. But what no one expected was that a widowed cowboy, quiet and haunted by ghosts, would cross her path. And that together, they would prove something many have forgotten, that family isn't made only of blood, but of choices, of courage, of heart. What begins as tragedy will touch your heart in a way few stories can. And when you find out who she faced, and who saved her, you'll understand why this story keeps being told through generations. There are things we only understand when pain knocks at the door, when the body cries out for rest, and the heart nearly falls silent. But still, the soul keeps going. This story begins with a woman alone on the road, a baby on her back, and dust up to her knees. And before you think you've seen this before, you haven't. Because what happened to her, and to the man who crossed her path that day, still echoes through the corners of the Old West like a legend of courage, compassion, and a love no one expected. Have you ever walked miles for someone who couldn't even ask for help? She did. And what she found will make you see family in a whole new way. The sun was already high when Clara adjusted the baby on her back with a tied cloth. The cracked ground beneath her feet had looked the same for hours. Dust, stones, silence. There was no wagon, no horse. Just her own footsteps, and the slow breathing of the little one she carried. From afar, she was nothing but a curved shadow on the horizon. No one knew where she had come from, not even she could say exactly where she was. She only knew she had to get out of that town where no one had offered a helping hand. Every step was a cry for help, but also a promise. She would not let her child die there. Even if she had to cross the entire Old West barefoot. Clara remembered the last time she had eaten properly. It had been 3 days. She remembered the muffled crying at night, trying to hide her fear. And what hurt the most wasn't the hunger, nor the exhaustion. It was the silence. A silence that screams. But what she didn't know yet was that someone, just a few miles away, was also hearing that silence. And he wouldn't be able to ignore it much longer. Jonas had lived alone for 8 years. Since he buried his wife by the old oak tree behind the ranch, he talked more to the cows than to people. The Old West was like that, a land of silence, of losses, and of those who learned to breathe through pain. But that morning, as he saddled the horse, he felt something different in the wind. It was as if the air smelled of urgency. The animals were restless, the dog barked at nothing, and for a moment, Jonas thought he had heard a cry. But there hadn't been a child there for years, not since his own son left. Still, he mounted up. Instinct spoke louder than reason, as often happened with soft-hearted cowboys. With the rifle strapped to the saddle and his hat shading his eyes, he followed the sound the wind seemed to guide. It was as if fate had whispered straight from the sky. And though he didn't know it yet, his path and Clara's were about to cross. The desert would be the setting, but the encounter would change everything. Clara staggered when she saw the figure approaching on horseback. For a moment, she thought about hiding. The Old West wasn't kind to women alone. But her legs no longer obeyed, and the baby had started to cry. She dropped to her knees in the dry dirt, kicking up a small cloud of dust. That's when Jonas saw her for the first time. He pulled the reins slowly. The horse stopped and let out a warm snort. Jonas dismounted, saying nothing, just observing the woman and the small bundle on her back. She tried to speak, but her voice was nothing but air. He then pulled the canteen from his belt and offered it to her. Drink first. Then talk. He spoke as if to a wounded animal, with care and respect. She drank. And cried. Jonas didn't ask a thing. He knelt beside her and stayed in silence for several minutes. Then he took the kerchief from his neck and wiped the child's face. That wasn't charity, it was memory. Something in that moment reminded him of himself. But it was still too soon to understand why. And the way back to the ranch held more revelations than he could imagine. Jonas's ranch was simple, built of dark wood, surrounded by dry trees and ancient silences. Clara stepped in with small steps, carrying the baby in her arms. There was no luxury, but there was warmth, a lit fire, stale bread, and a rocking chair that creaked as if it missed someone. Jonas pointed to the table and said, "Eat first. Questions later." She ate slowly, like someone afraid the food might run out. The baby slept in her lap, wrapped in cloth too thin for the coming cold. Jonas watched her like someone reading an old book, full of marks, but still with pages left to turn. And even without saying much, the room already told what he was thinking. This woman was no longer a stranger. When Clara lay down on the makeshift bed near the stove, sleep hit her like a blow. But for Jonas, sleep took longer. He stayed sitting by the fire, remembering nights just like this, but with different voices in the house. It was impossible to ignore what fate had just dropped on his doorstep, because his heart was beginning to wake up again. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of coffee and warm bread. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. It had been so long since she felt what it was like to wake up feeling safe. Jonas sat at the table, waiting. "Got a name?" he asked, without lifting his eyes from the cup. She answered in a whisper, "Claire. And he's Benjamin." The conversation was broken, paused. Words too heavy for the start of the day. But between one question and another, Clara told just enough. She had been thrown out by her late husband's family, accused of being a burden, a problem. That baby, they said, would only bring misfortune. So she walked. Walked until someone truly saw her. Jonas listened with quiet eyes, but a storm in his chest. That story sounded like another, his own. Except instead of walking, he had shut himself off. Buried what he felt alongside his wife and son, and never spoke of love again. But now, faced with that thin woman and the baby who smiled in his sleep, something inside him began to crack. And cracks let the light in. On the third day, while Clara was washing clothes by the creek behind the ranch, Jonas showed up with an unexpected proposal. There were no flourishes in his speech, as was the custom of Old West cowboys. Say, "Take care of the house, the garden. I'll take care of you." Clara froze, holding the sheet in her hands, the wind brushing her face. She didn't know if it was pity, loneliness, or a disguised cry for help. But for the first time in a long while, someone was offering her something without asking anything in return. Jonas wasn't talking about marriage or obligations. Just a place. A place to stay. Solid ground to stop running. It was little, but for her, it was everything. Even so, she didn't answer right away. Life had already taught her that promises, sometimes, hurt more than hunger. But something in his eyes, in the calm way he watered the plants while waiting, told her that maybe, just maybe, he was breaking his own silence, not for her, but with her. That night, an unexpected storm took over the sky. The wind howled through the cracks in the wood, and the rain fell heavy as if trying to wash away the Old West sorrows. Clara woke to find the baby burning with fever. His tiny body trembled, his eyes rolled back, and fear choked her voice. She ran to Jonas's room without thinking. He didn't ask a thing. Took the boy in his arms, lit the oil lamp, and heated water with herbs in an iron pot. "Trust me," he said firmly, as he soaked cloths to bring down the fever. For hours, the two sat in silence, only exchanging glances and hope. It felt like they were fighting something invisible. And they fought together. By dawn, Benjamin was breathing better. Sleeping peacefully, sweaty, alive. Clara collapsed. She cried as if her soul had shattered. Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder and said nothing. But in that simple gesture, she understood. The bond between them was no longer just shelter. It was something unnamed, but maybe, just maybe, it was love. 2 days later, as Jonas was fixing the back fence, 3 horsemen appeared. Covered in dust, armed, and with the eyes of men who knew evil. They were from the village Clara had come from, sent by her brother-in-law to bring her back, as if she were forgotten property. Jonas saw them before they reached the porch. "She here," one of them shouted. "The family wants what's theirs." Clara heard from inside and froze. The baby slept. The past did not. Jonas walked slowly to the gate, without raising his rifle, but with firm eyes. "No one is taken by force here," he said. especially not a mother and her child. The tension was thick, and the silence felt ready to explode. The men laughed, spat on the ground, and said they'd be back with more. Jonas watched them ride off. He knew that wouldn't be the last visit. But he also knew that something inside him would never allow Clara to be taken. This wasn't just about her. It was about everything he had lost. And maybe now, he had something worth truly protecting. In the following days, Jonas reinforced the fence, set traps in the woods, and taught Clara how to use an old shotgun that had been gathering dust for years. "It's not just to shoot," he said. "It's to remind you that you have a choice." Clara held the gun with trembling hands, but her eyes were steady. Fear still lived inside her, but now, it shared space with courage. While the ranch was turning into a fortress, something more delicate was quietly being built. Jonas had begun to smile with his eyes whenever he saw Benjamin babble. Clara, in turn, stirred the coffee like she owned the place. It was subtle but real. They were becoming a family, not through papers or vows, but through affection and shared life. On a clear night, sitting on the porch, Clara asked, "Why are you doing all this for me?" Jonas stayed silent for a while. Then he answered, "Because you showed up when I had already given up on myself." She didn't reply. But in that moment, she knew the ranch was no longer just a shelter, it was home. It was a gray afternoon when Clara saw the dust on the horizon. 4, maybe 5 horses. They had come back, and this time, with more guns and fewer words. Jonas was already in the barn, ready. Clara held Benjamin in her arms, then wrapped him in a blanket and laid him in the kitchen before stepping to the door with the shotgun in her hands. The past would no longer decide her fate. The men dismounted arrogantly. "She's coming with us. She has no choice." Jonas walked up to them slowly. "Yes, she does. And she chose to stay." The silence that followed was sharp. One of the men drew his revolver, but before he could aim, he heard the sharp sound of Clara's gun cocking. "Take one more step, and you'll see what a scared mother is capable of." No one expected that. The fear in the men's eyes was real. Jonas didn't have to shoot, nor say another word. They backed off. Not because of brute force, but because of conviction. Clara was no longer the woman who walked the road alone. And Jonas was no longer the man haunted by ghosts. Together, they had built something no one could take by force. Days later, Clara woke to the smell of fresh bread and burning firewood. But something was different that day. Jonas was clean-shaven, wearing his best shirt, and smiling with a nervousness almost childlike. "We're going to town today. The pastor's back." She frowned. "Why?" He simply answered, "Because Benjamin needs a full name. And so do you." At the small wooden chapel, with a few candles and curious eyes all around, Jonas held the baby in his arms. When the pastor asked for the child's last name, he answered out loud, "Benjamin Carter." His own. Clara looked at him with teary eyes, trying not to cry. No one had ever given a name like that, as if it were an inheritance. As if it were destiny. After the baptism, Jonas walked beside Clara, hand in hand, through the town that had once turned her away. She walked upright, unashamed, with a faint smile. People stared, whispered. But she didn't hear them. Because in that moment, there was no more fear, no more road. Only the certainty that she, and that baby, finally belonged somewhere. That night, Clara and Jonas sat on the porch, like so many times before. But now, with no fear, no need to run. Benjamin slept peacefully in a basket beside them. The moon shone high, and only the crickets broke the silence. Clara turned to Jonas and asked, "Why did you choose me?" He paused, then answered, "Because you chose me first, without even knowing it." She smiled. The road, the pain, the insults, all seemed far away now. That ranch, with its old tiles and worn wood, was more than shelter. It was proof of a new beginning. And the Old West, so often cruel, had become the setting for something rare, 2 tired souls choosing to walk together, with no rush. Before going to bed, Jonas stood up, tucked the baby in, and made a simple gesture. He hung his hat beside Clara's. 2 hats side by side. A silent promise that, from that day on, there would be no more loneliness. Because in the end, Love may ride slow, but it always arrives. Life doesn't always give us what we ask for, but sometimes it gives us exactly what we need, even if it comes in the form of dust, silence, and a falling apart ranch. Clara didn't just find shelter. Jonas didn't just find a woman. They found each other, whole, even after everything. And you? Have you ever felt that someone showed up in your life at just the right moment? Have you ever had to walk alone for a while before someone truly saw you? Tell me in the comments. This may be a Western story, but the pain, it's the same even today. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And turn on the notification bell, because the next stories from the Old West will stir your heart even more. There's still a lot of dust to raise, and many truths to dig up.